Hi, I'm Abby and welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you all about the yachting industry. What is the yachting industry? How did I get into the yachting industry? How you can get into the yachting industry? But I'm also going to be sharing with you my honest truth and some secret little teas that had happened to me in the yachting industry for why I'm no longer in the yachting industry, just in case you too want to go into this industry because it is very, very glamorized. And I just want to break it down for you that it is not as glamorized as you think it is. And so I will be sharing with you some details and some stories that if I wanted to get back into the yachting industry after releasing this video, I probably would never get back in because of what I'm going to tell you. But you're gonna have to wait till the end of the video for that. But anyways, I will just break down in this video how I got into the industry, how you too can get into the industry, how it changed my life, how it also ruined my life, and some little secrets about the whole industry. Make sure you stay along to the end of the video. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It means so much to me. Let's get into it. What is the yachting industry? So most people don't fully understand what the yachting industry is. What this means is you're working on multi-million-dollar super yachts. Generally, a brand new yacht costs about $1 million per meter, just to give you an idea. I was working on boats range from 43 meters to 65 meters, so that was around like 112 to 165 foot boats. These are owned by the top 1% people in the entire world. The last boat that I worked on, the upkeep alone was 500,000 USD a month. The upkeep. Okay, so in order to have a yacht, you need to have petty cash of $500,000 or $1 million that you can just throw out the door. So we are talking about the wealthiest people in the entire world. And if you want to work on one of these boats, there's lots of different ways that you can do this. Anybody can get into the industry. It doesn't matter your nationality, your passport, because you're working in international waters. There are lots of different positions on a boat that you can work in. You can pretty much work on the interior, which the interior, they're generally stewardesses and they work their way up to chief stew. And what they do is pretty much they maintain the interior of the vessel. So that would be anything from pretty much cleaning on the inside, from doing like table service to laundry to cleaning the rooms, housekeeping, all that kind of stuff, you name it, and dealing with the guests more. And then you have the exterior, which is like the deckhands to the bosuns to the captain. They pretty much maintain the exterior of the vessel and they also deal with like the cranes and their navigations and all that kind of stuff. So I worked on deck. I was a deckhand, and generally this industry is very sexist to say the least. So most females work on the inside and most males work on the outside. So it's actually very difficult for me to find a role because technically the position I was applying for was a male position. And it's also difficult too because they don't really allow you to share a room with a male because of cabin arrangements, because you constantly are sharing a room with somebody. And because of like number wise and filling up the spaces, they can't always do that. And they also tend to think that females aren't as strong as capable because you are doing a lot of physical labor, which is so not true. But however, this is just like a whole thing about the yachting industry. Besides working on the interior or the exterior, you can also work as a chef. Every single boat needs a chef. Then you can also work as an engineer, which an engineer is pretty much just a mechanic. Like you don't really do much engineering. You're pretty much just a mechanic. There are two different types of yachts. You have a private yacht and then you have a charter yacht. So private yacht pretty much means that you're just going to be working and it's going to be like one owners that they just come and they use the boat. I want you to think of a yacht as a rich person's RV. It's like they can just move it all around the world wherever they want and they just have like a bunch of crew on the boat. And then a charter boat is pretty much the owners, of course, they come on every once in a while. However, it gets chartered out like for a couple of weeks throughout the year, and that's when you get to make a lot of tips. It's a lot harder and more intense work. I remember when I was working on a charter boat, like I didn't have a day off for like 45 days and I was probably working like in a 24-hour period. I would get lucky if I got 8 hours off, and I would get around 6 hours off. Let's say I finished my shift at like 10 p.m. I would have to be on deck at like 4 a.m. or something, and then you get a 2-hour nap or something in between. And if you're really lucky, you would get 10 hours off. So you'd be working 14-hour days, sometimes even more during this time. And like you would literally just be like working for the sake of working. Like that's literally the yachting industry, is like just literally look busy all the time, like freaking polish something or like whatever you can do, because oftentimes they just want you to work for the sake of working, even though you don't actually need to do anything. But when guests are on, you have to be always on. There's literally constantly people who are up, awake, on watch. You have to be always around but never be seen. How did I get into the yachting industry? I was living in Australia and I was bartending at the time. I had been doing my 2 years in Australia and I was kind of like not sure what I wanted to do next. I was a little bit broke. I was still in a lot of debt. I didn't want to stop traveling, but I also was just kind of at this point where I was really tired of being broke and spending all of my money. And I was like, hey, this sounds like a great idea to go live on a boat. I don't have any expenses. Everything's going to get paid for. All I really have, and then I get to travel as well. I was like, that sounds amazing. I can save and travel. Sign me up. And also I thought like working on these luxury boats would be super cool, super fun, and very glamorized, as you might think so yourself. I just had one friend who was in the yachting industry who was telling me all about it, and she had just joined and she loved it. And so when I moved back to the US to find a job in the yachting industry, I went and got my STCW, which is a course necessary for anybody that is going to be working on any type of vessel. And I also got my ENG1, which is like a medical health certificate. And I got my powerboat license because I wanted to work on deck, pretty much drive, I think a boat or a tender up to like 15 meters, which is like 45 feet. And I went to Fort Lauderdale. I ended up moving into a crew house, which is kind of like a hostel, but it's like just for specifically people who were looking for a job. And I pretty much started to cold call sell myself. If you're going to be looking to join the industry, make sure you sign up for all of the Facebook groups because there's different jobs that are posted there. I was applying to all these jobs that I found off of Facebook. I then also made my CV and I got like little business cards, and especially the business cards, whenever I would go out, I would go to every single networking event and I would just hand out my business cards like crazy anytime that I met a yachty. A yachty is a person who works in the yachting industry. I would hand them my details and be like, hey, if you ever need any day work or if you're looking for someone in my position, please give me a call. And generally, like by the end of the day, by handing out 10 or 15 CVs or business cards, I would get at least one phone call. And I also would wake up super early and I would sneak into these marinas and I would walk around and I would go be like, hey, it's a chief officer or captain on board. Can I speak to them? And that's really important that you want to make sure you ask for the chief officer or the captain because that's the head person instead of just some random decky or whatever, because that's generally who you're going to find on the outside of the boat. Talk to them and you pretty much introduce yourself and be like, hey, I'm just trying to get into the yachting industry. I would love to know if you have any work on board. I'm just trying to get some experience. Pretty much the way that this industry works is there's no really way of having any skills to work in this industry. You pretty much get hired based off your personality. They're down to train anybody. They're down for somebody who's hardworking. They're down for somebody who is reliable, especially if you have a great personality. So I was like, all right, cool. I can do this. I pretty much just sold myself, talked to as many people, networked my way through until I got my very first job. Now you can also join a bunch of different crew agencies, but those are a little bit hard to find a job when you are green. So if you were considered green, it means you have pretty much like less than 6 months experience in the industry. So you don't really know anything. So I would say if you don't have any experience whatsoever, the best thing to do is to network. Besides like the STCW and ENG, you don't really need any other courses, to be honest. Like you can get those courses later. It doesn't really matter. So don't waste your money like getting one of those courses or whatever it is. If you wanted to get into the yachting industry now, my best bet would be for you to go get your courses, your STCW, your ENG, and then I would move to one of the yacht hubs, which is Palma in Mallorca or Antibes in France, or you can move to the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area, and then you can look for a job depending on where you're from and things like that. And of course, network your way in, get as much experience as you can. But this industry is more about who you know than what you know. And another thing about this industry is that it is very superficial. So they do care about image a lot. So dress nice, clean cut. Like honestly, if you're a guy that has a beard, you probably won't get a job. Unfortunately, sad to say, but they pretty much don't hire ugly people. That's just the way that it is. And you have to understand that when you are working with people that have this much money, they can do whatever they want. There is no rules and there's no limits. And one of my friends, he always said to me, if it makes sense, it's not yachting. So whenever they have you do something or request or whatever, and you're like, that makes no sense, doesn't matter. It's the yachting industry. It doesn't make sense. You're dealing with the top 1%. And I don't think that many people understand how much money these people have and how much wealth these people attain, because it's actually mind-blowing to think about. So when it comes to living and working with these kind of people, it's a whole new ballpark and a whole new game. How the yachting industry forever changed my life. Before I got into yachting, I was in debt. I was traveling a lot. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just wanted to keep on traveling. I just didn't want to be broke. And the yachting industry provided that for me. It provided me with a salary. It provided me a place to save, to pay off my debt, to still travel and everything. And also one thing that I learned from the yachting industry was it opened my eyes to a new way of life and to learning. I remember I had never worked so hard in my entire life. I was working insanely long hours and I would see these people who were guests on the yacht, had all this unlimited time to do whatever they want. They could be on their yacht 7 months out of the year and weren't working. And I was like, this doesn't seem right. Like, how on earth am I working the hardest I've ever worked in my entire life. And yet I'm serving these people who aren't working at all. That doesn't add up. And so it really made me question what I was doing and how I was doing, and realizing that hard work doesn't get you anywhere. Like, yes, working hard is great and all, but you need to learn how to work smart. And it made me really ponder, like, what was I doing with my time and my life, and made me really rethink the way that I thought about money and life and everything. Through that and through talking to people, it really inspired me to start my own business, inspired me to eventually create content, to do what I'm doing now, to really create that own idea of freedom. Because I realized within the yachting industry that the only way that you truly do have freedom is if you have financial freedom. Because of the yachting industry, it made me go down a whole journey of entrepreneurship. I ended up reading multiple books, investing in businesses, learning more about that. I wouldn't be where I was today without the yachting industry, because of how hard I worked and seeing how little I was making and how much money these people were making. But it wasn't even about the money. It was about the time and the freedom that they got to do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. And to me, that was absolute freedom. Before I share with you some very personal information that had happened to me while on board Yachts and why I will ever go back to that industry ever again, I just want to share with you the whole entire dynamics of it if you are looking to go into this industry. I more than ever would discourage people to do this than I would to join it, because at the end of the day, yes, you make a lot of money, and yes, you do get to see really cool parts of the world. However, there is always a price for something, and the amount of therapy and the amount of work that I've had to go through after I left the yachting industry really played a massive toll on my mental health. I want you to imagine, they often compare yachting to prison. Now, hear me out. I know it doesn't sound like, okay, you're living on a super yacht in the Caribbean. I remember even one time a captain I worked for, I was like, I need a break. And he's like, you got a break when you got the job. Or I was like, I need a vacation. He's like, where are you gonna go? You live on a yacht. Yeah, I get it. Like, it seems like, oh my God, poor you. You get to work on a boat and you get to travel the world. Yes, but the highs are high and the lows are low. If you have ever seen the show Below Deck, you can kind of have a bit of a visual of what the living quarters and the space looks like. So you're in this tiny little conformed area and you share a space with somebody you don't know. You're working with all different types of nationalities. Now imagine having to go home, live and work and socialize and do everything with your coworkers. That is the yachting industry. You don't get to pick your coworkers. You don't get to pick your nationalities. You don't get to pick any of that. You also have no choice over what you wear. They give you a uniform. And since I was working on deck, they didn't even give me female clothes. I had to wear male clothing for 2.5 years. My last boat finally got me some female clothing after I had to argue for it. And because they didn't have the budget, mind you, I'm working for billionaires, but they didn't have the budget to buy me shorts. I had to wear male clothing for 2.5 years. One time I did have to share a space with a guy, which honestly didn't really care that much, but you're in these tiny little rooms. I could barely even do yoga with the floor space. Like, it doesn't even fit a yoga mat, if that makes any sense. So you're sharing a room with somebody constantly. Like, you have to be very quiet about everything, what you're doing. You know, you have no choice in what you wear. You have no choice in what you eat. The chef just makes whatever they want to make, and that's what you have to eat. You don't have a choice in when you sleep, when you work. You have no choice over anything. And also, you can't really be on your phone at all. So you're pretty much just like there having to do exactly what they want. And you can't like really have an opinion, have a voice or anything. You're just a number. So you pretty much just need to shut up, smile, and go to work. And no matter what happens, you just have to act like everything's okay. And whenever they ask you to do something, you just got to do it with a smile on your face. So it is not fun at all. And it is a very, very, very controlling environment. And it feels like you have absolutely no freedom, to the point where you are full on getting suffocated, and to a point where it's like you have zero control over anything. And one thing about me, so when I was younger, I've struggled a lot with my body image. I have had eating disorders before. I've had control issues. When I was in high school, I actually ended up like running myself. I ran so much that I ended up getting hospitalized. I had under like 6% body fat, and I was counting and burning off every single calorie that I ate. I was bulimic, anorexic, and overexercised, all because of like a need to control. So I've had a bunch of issues in my life and in my past with having to be in these controlling environments. And so I realized later, once I was in the yachting industry, that I was drawn and attracted to these controlling environments without even realizing it. Something that I thought I was running away from, and something that I was like, I don't want anything to do with this. I ended up being confronted with being exactly in something I was trying to avoid. While I was in the yachting industry, I kind of got obsessive over calorie calories again, to the point where when my Apple Watch broke, I had a full-blown mental breakdown because I didn't know how many calories I burned. And it really reminded me that I was like, okay, I think the only thing that I have control over myself right now was my calorie burning or my calorie intake. And it really made me like reflect on the environment I was in. And that was one of the first things that I was like, maybe this isn't like the best industry for me personally to be in. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is honestly, I had no idea that sexism really truly existed. I didn't really experience that much sexism most of my life. Mind you, I've been a lot in male-dominated sports and things like that, but I didn't really see it or feel it. I remember when I was applying for jobs and people were saying this to me in person. They're like, oh, you're too pretty to work outside. Are you okay with getting dirty? Or are you sure you can handle this? People would look at me and be like, oh, she can't do this or not. And I'm like, mind you, I was actually stronger and taller than a lot of the guys there. And it's like, just because I'm a female doesn't mean that I can't be doing heavy loading and lifting. Like they would pretty much just treat me differently because I was a female, and my level of hierarchy since I joined and on deck, I was at the bottom and there was a lot of male figures above me. So I received a lot of sexual harassment. I was sexually assaulted. I was pretty much treated terribly a lot because I was a female, especially since I was in a male dominated area versus if I worked on the interior, which is more girls. And so it's a very sexist thing of being like, girls stay inside and boys go outside. One thing I do want to bring up without going too much into the whole sexual assault, and one thing that I do say about it is that I know far too many women in the industry who have been sexually assaulted. Probably more than I can count on the thumb of my hands who've told me about it. And I don't even know about the women who haven't told me about it. And it goes on way too much and way too often. And it's a very tricky situation to handle and to deal with because it's where you live, it's where you work, they're generally your boss. And it just gets everything complicated because sometimes you're literally in the middle of the sea and like, what are you gonna do? Sometimes who are you gonna call? Who are you gonna tell? Like, you're going to lose your job sometimes if you complain. If you go and complain about your boss sexually assaulting you, you're probably going to get fired. So it's this kind of weird thing to be like, do I leave? Do I stay? What do I do? And if you personally have ever been sexually assaulted in any type of an industry, I just want to say, first off, it's not your fault. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Has nothing to do with you. And it's all has something to do with them. And you did not deserve it at all whatsoever. So I just want to say that first off. And two, I want to remind you that every single abuser has their perks. If they didn't have their perks, they would not be abusers. So do not beat yourself up for allowing things to happen and things to mislead. The best thing to do is when it first happens, you need to put a stop to it as much as you can. And if it doesn't, you do need to take the actions or tell someone or speak up about it, because if they are doing it to you, they are going to be doing it to somebody else. And the one thing that happened to me in the yachting industry, which this was my final straw, which I should have quit after this, was myself and two other guys. We were held at gunpoint outside of one of the boats taking out the trash. We weren't harmed at all in this, thank goodness, and we walked away without being scarred. But being held at gunpoint doesn't, just because you weren't physically harmed doesn't mean you mentally weren't harmed. And I hope that no one ever has to experience that ever in their lives and have their life flash before their eyes, especially when you're doing a job like that and doing work for somebody in an environment that you think that you would never get hurt in. It was on Labor Day, taking out the trash in broad daylight with two guys, and we got held at gunpoint. So if that can happen there, then it can happen anywhere. The thing that was really messed up was, yes, it wasn't technically their fault. However, we went back to the boat and we freaked out, obviously told them it was, as you would, how does someone act and react after they get held at gunpoint? And they told us not to call the cops. They told us that if we were to call the cops, it would ruin the plans of the vessel. They wanted us to stay quiet. They actually told us when we came back, they said, oh, can you guys go do a deck check? So they wanted us to finish off working after that. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, fuck that. Like, we didn't even do anything. Like, I was so shaken up. I didn't even know what to do. I was so in a trauma response and a whole flight mode. I actually called my older brother, who he's a police officer, and he's the only person I know who's ever been shot at or held a gun at. And I was like, well, I'm going to call him because who else do you call in this situation? And I didn't even know what to do. And he was like, you should call the police. And I remember going back to the captain, the chief officer, and I said, I don't care. I'm going to call the police because I can't like sit and sleep with myself knowing that there's this crazy guy with a gun running around and we didn't do anything about it. So I remember we did call the police, and I remember the chief officer took the phone out of my hands and even like started talking to the police. It wouldn't even let me speak. And he was like, well, you were choking up, like you couldn't. And I was like, well, have you ever had a gun held to your head? Like, I'm sorry, sometimes it's really hard to freaking speak after you've been traumatized. Cops came, we gave her a spiel, and they just kind of treated us like nothing happened and tried to brush it under the rug and told us to go straight back to work. It was so difficult and so challenging because I was so shaken up for so long. But I will say that that moment forever changed my life because I was 26 and I had been wanting to change. I had been wanting to change so much, but I didn't do it yet. I kept not doing the things that I needed to do to take the steps to change. However, when I was held at gunpoint, I was like, this is it. This is enough. Like, I don't want to die behind a trash can at 26 years old, and this having been my life. If I'm going to change, I need to change now. I went sober for 9 months after that. I stopped doing everything completely because I was like, I don't even know what just happened, but I think that I need to process this sober, and I don't think any type of substance is going to help me in this situation. And mind you, the whole entire crew that I worked with, they were like, first, of course, like, oh my God, but again, people stopped talking about it. They didn't care. They didn't offer us any help. They didn't offer us any therapy. They just told us to go back to work. That was it. Brushed it under the rug. The thing was, when I went sober, they started to ask me if I was okay. They said, what's wrong? Are you okay? Like, why aren't you drinking? Why don't you want to come out with us? And I was like, I almost died and you didn't care about that. But now that I am not drinking and partying with you guys, now you care. So I felt very disheartened and realized these people that I'd been spending pretty much a past year of my life with, working and living and traveling, didn't really care if I lived or died. And that really was disheartening. I was like, I need to get out of this industry for good because they don't care. You're just a number at the end of the day. Another thing about the yachting industry is that it is a very, very big party industry. A lot of people do a lot of drugs. They drink a lot. Some of the most messed up people I have met have worked in the yachting industry. If you do join, don't be surprised by some things that you might see in all the crazy partiness, because that is very normal and happens quite a bit. And it's more often that you will see that than you will see people like, being more chill, cool, calm, and relaxed. But if you think about it, this environment that you're working in, it's so toxic. It's so crazy. Like, sometimes you're at sea for months and you don't see anybody, you don't have any interaction, like you're going crazy. So when you get to land, or when you have the boss on and then you get handed like a ton of cash, of course you want to go party and go crazy. Like, I did for a while. That is another dark side of the yachting industry. A lot of people have also asked me like, oh, what are the craziest things that people have asked you to do and whatever. One time, like, they had someone fly on a private jet to go get like Dunkin' Donuts and fly it back to the Bahamas. Or I remember one time the guests wanted it to be like air conditioned outside, and we had to try to like air condition the outside and crazy stuff like that. But I didn't really have the most crazy experiences at all. To be completely honest with you, most of the people who were actually the guest on the boat I quite liked them. They were kind, they were respectable. Most people were very self-made millionaires. Of course, like, you have the odd thing, but most people, I think they look at these people with all this ultra wealth and they think that they are these like terrible people. And I think that's the least thing from the truth at all. Not from my experience at all. Of course, like, there's people like that everywhere in everything that you do, but having money does not make you a bad person. It only just amplifies who you are already. Don't ever think that just because somebody has a lot of money, they are a bad person or anything like that. I actually learned and was inspired by a lot of people and saw some of these people, some of the wealthiest people in the world, as some of the most generous people I met. And yes, these are the owners of the boat. And the reason they call them owners is because they pretty much do own you. Again, they just come on their boat and that's all they do. They're just here for their vacation to relax. Like, they don't know anything about you. They don't really like connect with you. We're a cleaner at the end of the day. It's like if you have a house and someone just comes and cleans your house, that's it. Like it doesn't really matter. Or you're a gardener. They're happy you're there. They're glad to see a smile on your face, and that's it. So it's like there's not a lot of connect or conversation with that. Sometimes there is, but it's like don't really speak unless you're spoken to type of thing. The one and only charter boat that I worked on was actually freaking crazy. Like it was very dramatic. Like we had so many things. I found out later that the captain that on that boat was literally drunk and fucked up on drugs the whole entire time of the 6 months I was on the boat. He was the captain and our boss during this whole entire time, and he had overdosed on drugs twice while we were on charter and underway. And like we had times where like our boat went dead ship. There was like absolutely no power in the middle of the night. Like we've had some crazy things happen and chaotic things that had gone on in the industry for sure. That was very much like very stressful. And of course, there's different crew dynamics, which make it very dramatic. And like, you know, you're combining a ton of different people from different nationalities. You're putting everyone under stress. We're working a ton, crazy long hours. We're in the sun. We're dealing with a lot of people. It does not bring out the best in people. And I think that when you are in a traumatized environment, it makes everybody kind of like, you know, get at each other and kind of attack each other because we were not in a healthy environment. Now, the yachting industry, it changed my life for two main reasons, I would say, is that it made me realize I wanted to have my own business because I didn't want to work so hard for anyone ever again. I was like, I'm never working. Like if I have to work hard, I'm going to work hard for myself. I'm never going to work for somebody else again because this is terrible. And I realized that with true freedom is financial freedom. And I wanted to be wherever I want, whenever I want. And I am now. I'm living here in Bali. I have made success out of myself, and I would consider myself to be successful because I get to do what I love every single day, which is surfing, and I get to live wherever I want, and I get to surround myself with people that I want. And to me, that is the richest I will ever be. The other thing is that it set me up for financial success. I had a lot of debt from student loans that I never even paid off. And I was able to, because mind you, this was during the pandemic. And so I was in the US Virgin Islands, so we could still charter guests from the US, and a lot of them came to the Caribbean, and we were able to charter a bunch of money. And within like one season, I was able to pay off all of my debt. And then after that, I pretty much used that money to start another business. And I used that money to save up, to then leave the yachting industry, then have a big safety buffer, to then invest into one other business and keep going. And it really just helped me set me up for a financial success, from taking me out of debt to putting me into a positive to where I could invest. And I wouldn't have been there in such a short amount of time if it wasn't for the yachting industry. But again, everything has its price. I can tell you that after I left the yachting industry, it took me a little bit over a solid year to kind of feel mentally okay again. I was so grateful that I was in therapy already before I left the yachting industry. And afterwards, I still continued to be in therapy, and I didn't realize how much it really affected me and how it took me like years after leaving it to finally feel okay and good again. The reason I share these stories is because a lot of people are always like, oh, how do you get into this? This is so glamorized. This is amazing. And I just want to say that a lot of things are glamorized. They always look better. The grass is always greener. But I think specifically with the yachting industry, of course, every boat is completely different. You have to think of boats as like people. Everybody is completely different. However, with the yachting industry, it is something that I would never, ever, ever put in. And I would never, ever recommend it to anybody because I think it's one of the most toxic work environments you can ever do for yourself. And it's a trap. They call it the golden handcuffs because you can make a ton of money, and then what? Like you all of a sudden you're making like $10,000, $15,000 a month. But if you want to leave, like what are you going to do? You have no other skills in life because you've been yachting. What kind of skills does that transfer into? So you kind of are like, well, I got to start at ground zero again. You don't have a place to live. That's your environment. That's the people you hang out with. That's everyone you know. That's your network. So when you lose your job, when you leave the yachting industry, you're losing everything. You're starting over from scratch. It's like an abusive relationship. I remember being in the yachting industry being like, wow, this is like why it's so hard for people to leave an abuser, because it's their financial support, it's their home, it's their environment, it's their family, it's everything they know. So it's very difficult to do that and to leave it. And so people get very honestly trapped. Like you think maybe I'll just do it for a few years and get out. Like, yeah, maybe you might be able to, but remember like to stick to your goal and to do it. And I really hope that, you know, other people have better experiences than what I have, but I just want to share my experience and things that have happened to me, because I think that often at times I see online people like, oh, do this, get into that, you should come into this industry, whatever, and they talk about it, but they don't really tell you the truths behind it all. And back to the whole thing about even like with the sexual assault is, what are you gonna do? Like, who are you gonna tell? What's gonna happen? Like, I remember even one time going to talk to the management and they shut me down. Who else am I gonna talk to? You're in the ocean. Like, it's the Wild West out there. Like, there's not a lot of rules and things you can do. So it's, something that I would personally never ever do again. However, it changed my life and I wouldn't be here without it. I just shared this with you because I want to be honest. I want to be transparent. I want to talk about the things I've gone through, and maybe, I believe too, with speaking and sharing about your experiences, it gives it less power as well. So if you are considering going into the yachting industry, just think about this before you do that and think about why you want to do it. And if it's just for the money, know that you can make a lot of money doing a lot of other things and keep your peace, because honestly, peace is so valuable and one of the most important things you can ever have. If you still want to go into the yachting industry, then, after I told you this, and that's completely fine. Just wanted to share on here because a lot of people ask me, how do I get into the yachting industry, my experience and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that is it. And again, thank you so much for watching. I know that your time is super valuable. So if you've made it here to the end, thank you so, so much. If you have, can you please hit that like button and hit that subscribe button? And I appreciate you so much. And again, if you have any questions, leave a comment below. Thank you.